Arthur Miller once said that, other than a doctor saving someone's life, writing a worthy play was the most important thing a human being could do. Now it may occur to many of you why he made such statement. Because he believed that the mission of the theatre is to raise the consciousness of people to their human possibilities. Plays could ask difficult questions about morality and responsibility and then challenge people to change their lives and the world. Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about a hugely popular and significant play in American literature, Death of a Salesman, through the lens of a tragedy. The play is written by Arthur Miller and was first premiered on Broadway in February 1949. It won 1949 Pulitzer Prize for Drama and Tony Award for Best Play. Since then, there have been multiple renditions and shows, and the play has been adapted to other forms in media as well, like films and television series. Miller was born in New York City in 1915. By the time he was a teenager, his family, like many others, was struggling through the Great Depression. His father lost his clothing business during the Wall Street crash, and the family had to move to a smaller house in Brooklyn. The Great Depression and the after effects of World War II influenced Miller to write plays about vulnerable, everyday people working and struggling to get ahead. As Aristotle said that art imitates life, Miller's most famous plays are based on events from his life or on current events of that time. Likewise, the story and setting of Death of a Salesman were inspired by a family's economic struggle during those times. The life of Miller's salesman uncle and the Brooklyn house where Miller grew up. Death of a Salesman is a social tragedy. It is a tragedy about the differences between the Loman family's dream and the reality of their lives. The play is a scathing critique of the American dream and the competitive materialistic American society of the late 1940s. It's a play about the struggle for success and the disappointment of the American. In Death of a Salesman, Miller's indebtedness to the shape of tragedy in the theatrical past is everywhere apparent, as is his effectiveness in adapting its conventions to the scaled-down economics of the modern world. In the play, Miller emblematizes the instability of tragedy by concentrating on elements that are little and local, then discovers them in a symbolic dimensions far beyond the anecdotal. Willie's story is in the first instant personal, as tragedy always is. Yet its resonances stretch far beyond a given time at a given place. The scene is Brooklyn, Willie Loman territory, but it is a Brooklyn of the imagination dramatically transformed. Arthur Miller is one of the fiercest advocates of the modern conception of tragedy. His play Death of a Salesman had been rejected by some critics on the basis that it was not in conformity with main tenets of the classical tragedy. In reaction to these critics, Miller wrote an essay entitled Tragedy of a Common Man in 1958, in which he defended the conception of tragedy by defining the form of tragedy and tragic hero from a whole new perspective. According to Aristotle, a tragedy then is the imitation of an action that is serious and also as having magnitude complete in itself, in language with pleasurable accessories, each kind brought in separately in the parts of the work, in a dramatic, not in a narrative form, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. Accordingly, Aristotle in his Poetics suggests that the hero of a tragedy must evoke a sense of pity or fear within the audience, stating that the change of fortune presented must not be the spectacle of a virtuous man brought from prosperity to adversity. The protagonist will evoke both our pity and fear if he is neither thoroughly good or bad, but a mixture if both, and this tragic effect will be stronger if he is of higher than ordinary moral worth, a man of distinguished qualities and capabilities, such as a man exhibited as suffering a change in fortune from happiness to misery, due to mistake choice of action to which he is led by his tragic flaw or hamartia. One common form of hamartia in Greek tragedies was hubris, that pride or overweening self-confidence which leads the protagonist to commit the tragic mistake. Aristotle's insights to the art of tragedy exerted a lasting influence on Western literature in general, and on the English one in particular. As it can be noticed, this definition echoes strongly Aristotle's rise and fall pattern and the stature of his heroes. One such instance being Shakespeare's Othello, which strongly fits Aristotle's concepts of tragic hero and plot. In the 20th century, many aspects of the classical tragedy, as described by Aristotle, were questioned and dramatists broke away from the Greek canons. Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman, has been dismissed on the basis of its protagonist Willy Loman lacks the stature of the tragic hero. Miller's conception of tragedy retains only its catastrophic ending. It contends that the last appeal of tragedy is due to our need to face the fact of death in order to strengthen ourselves for life, and that over and above this function of the tragic viewpoint, there are and will be a number of variations which no single definition will ever embrace. Miller distinguishes between stature and rank and argues that if the Greek dramatists dealt solely with the characters of high estate, it is because they were living in a hierarchical society. Relying heavily on this idea, Miller goes on to demote the traditional conventions of the tragedy. According to Miller, the common man can pretend to a tragic status, and his story can provide materials for tragedy, provided that his story engages issues of importance, such as sense of personal dignity, the survival of the race, or the relationships of man to God. According to us, this variation ought to be understood against Aristotle's rise and fall pattern. For in modern societies where the political systems are democratic, kings and princes no longer raise your passion, and low man's misery and laws are as tearing as the fall of king was for the Greeks. As regards the tragic flaw, the modern tragic hero may or may not have a defect of character or hamartia. Miller remarks that the flaw or crack in the character is really nothing and need to be nothing, but his inherent willingness to remain passive in the face of what he conceives to be a challenge his dignity, his image of his rightful status. What comes out from Miller's overall revision of the poetics is that he has shifted Aristotle's focus on the form of tragedy to the content of tragedy. In other words, the American dramatist shifted the interest from plot to theme. Besides, Miller has also overlooked Aristotle's concept of catharsis and has drawn a portrait of a tragic hero from the lower classes rather from the higher ones. The reason is that of the common man is more representative of the modern society than the hybrid. Death of a Salesman, written along the lines of the finest classical tragedy, is the revelation of a man's downfall in distraction whose roots are entirely in his own soul. It relates the story of Willy Loman, a salesman in his early 60s who dreams to become a successful businessman and to be well liked by people. But Willy's dream is an illusion, and his precarious social and economic condition is compounded by his entanglement with his own son Biff. At the end of the play, Willy realizes he can never fulfill his dream. But when he receives assurance that Biff loves him, Willy commits suicide so that his family would benefit from the insurance money. The portrait of Willy Loman is at odds with that of his classical counterpart. His very name suggests his humble origin, Lowman. But in spite of his low social status, Willy succeeds to impress the reader. The reason is that even though he fails to materialize his dreams of respectability and success, he still keeps his dignity. For in the play, Miller is careful to stress his character's struggle to retain his dignity as much as he engages the issues of material success and popular esteem. Behind Willy's continuous struggle to keep his personal dignity, Miller probes the essence of the American dream and depicts the shortcoming of the capitalistic society during the years of depression. In fact, Willy drifts in and out of a dream. In Death of a Salesman, Willy Loman stands more like the scapegoat of the capitalist society and the bitter illusions of the American dream than the victim of any of his personal shortcomings. Like all tragic heroes, he remains faithful to his vision, and his struggle upward remains firmly established in his character and hopes. And if he has chosen to commit suicide, it is not because he has failed to accommodate the new order and has given up his efforts at social enhancement. He himself refutes this alternative when he says, "You can't eat the orange and throw away the pea. A man is not a piece of fruit." Instead, Willy has consciously chosen to invest his last asset, his life, for the price of the insurance money. His ultimate vision is that the hopes he placed in the American dream were misguided, and that his dream of success can be achieved only through and after death. It is probably something of a truism to say that Death of a Salesman represents the dark underside of the so-called American dream, a phrase that originated in the early 1930s. As the play demonstrates time and time again, that dream is likely to become a nightmare for individuals caught in between the qualities of an encroaching materialism and the rampant consumerism it implies. Happiness is equated with material success. Anything less than being rich signifies failure. Willie fully buys into this myth as well as its deceptive corollaries. Be liked and you shall never want. Look good and make an impression. Be athletic, nice and manly. This is the legacy he wills on his sons, handicapping any chance they might have had to find out who they really are or what they might have become under the influence of a different father. Willie never realizes until it is for too late that business is business, a far more lethal game than anything he has ever had in mind as a ticket to the misbegotten success that continues to elude him. Neither does he have any sense that the growing corporate culture, an unsentimental conglomerate of take and take, not give and take, has stacked all the cards against him. The ideas that Arthur Miller presented in his essay, Tragedy and the Common Man, are perfectly reflected in his play, Death of a Salesman. Arthur Miller emphasizes his character Willie Loman not as a tragic hero in classical tragedy, but as a modern-day tragic hero and a pathetic tragic hero in 1940s. America who quests for self-identity because of the harsh outcome of the commercialized world. Miller creates a hero of modernism with an influence from the social movements in his era. Thus he revises both the classical tragedy and tragic hero to create his favorite subject of the modern-day tragedy. Lewis states that Aristotelian concepts weigh heavily on an altered world. In the modernist era, beginning with industrialization, late 19th century and early 20th century, a new kind of tragic hero was created out as a reaction to the English Renaissance, the age of enlightenment and romanticism. He redefined the tragic hero. Willie Loman, a product of society, became a modern tragic hero crying out the social injustice in a shattered dream. So we have come to the end of this video. This was a very humble effort to present an idea how Arthur Miller redefined the tragedy in the 20th century and enriched the American literature through his classic play, Death of a Salesman. Thank you for being with us. If anyone who is interested in literature and American literature will hopefully find this video helpful. If you guys have any queries, doubts, please comment in the comment section and please give your honest feedbacks. Thank you.